Welcome to another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, where certified financial planner Lauren Sherman shares thoughts on having a healthy mind, body, and spirit, an abundance of wealth inside portfolios and out, and lessons learned from clients and mentors over the years.
Welcome in and thank you for joining me for another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. Of course, I am your host, Lauren Sherman, and today we are going to tackle part 2 of our year in review for 2022. As I mentioned in our part 1 review last episode, in general, I prefer to look toward the future since we cannot change what happened in the past. But I've come to realize even though we can't change the past, there is an awful lot we can learn from it. And the beginning of the year feels like the perfect time to reflect. So let's continue along with our 2022 Year in Review, Part 2. We kick off Part 2 with an episode that came out in June called Finding Peace of Mind During Unpeaceful Markets. Regardless of where the market is at when you are listening right now, this will be an important episode to revisit. The very nature of the stock market is that it does not move in a straight line, but rather up and down like a roller coaster. And when you are in the middle of what feels like a never-ending plunge downward, it tends to feel like an unprecedented event. To a certain point, I suppose this is true because everything currently happening or will happen in the future will be new in some way. History never repeats itself exactly, but as the saying goes, it sure does rhyme. This episode had a lot of action steps that you could get started on. First off, we included a 2-page checklist titled, What Issues Should I Consider When Dealing with High Inflation? So a first action step would be to print that off and complete each question, then email it over to us and our team will review it and send back some initial feedback. The handy part about this step is that each question listed is simply a yes or no answer, so you can zip through that in just a couple of minutes. Additionally, we've included access to a 2-page cheat sheet that includes 7 principles for finding peace during unpeaceful markets. You can request this by simply sending a quick email with the subject line, Unpeaceful Markets Cheat Sheet, and we will be happy to send that your way. A couple of principles included on that cheat sheet are, first, focus on what you can control. Under this principle, we talked about having a plan with guardrails in place so that you don't make emotional investment decisions. Focusing on what we can control also includes maintaining proper diversification, aligning your portfolio with your risk tolerance, and finally, reviewing costs and cutting any unnecessary expenses that do not add value. There are several other valuable nuggets, such as what happens to your investment returns if you miss just a small handful of the market's best days. Also, how to leverage tax savings in a down market, such as Roth conversions and tax loss harvesting, and so much more. This has become one of the most downloaded episodes, and for good reason, as unpeaceful markets are never going away. Our next episode was a review of Jacob Schroeder's Kiplinger's article titled 6 Life-Changing Lessons from 2 Retirees. While this one did not have the hard-hitting investment or tax advice that some of you listen in for, in a way, this was an even more important topic than those how-to methodical episodes. Because if we think about it, all of the tax and investment planning in the world doesn't mean a lot if we don't have a true why, a true purpose behind it. The takeaways from this episode are pretty straightforward, as we included a separate action step that correlated with each of the 6 lessons. Our first lesson is that your calling doesn't have to end at retirement. Lesson number 2, your life satisfaction improves by improving the lives of others. Lesson number 3, being part of a community will help you thrive. And lesson number 4, mentoring allows you to make a bigger difference. Number 5, you're never too old or too experienced to grow as a person. And finally, lesson number 6, variety is truly the spice of life and possibly a happy retirement. Of course, saying these lessons without hearing or reading the supporting facts and stories behind each one, they may fall a little flat as you listen right now. So I really encourage you to go back and have another listen, or at least check out that cheat sheet that we've created for you. you may find that one of these lessons in particular really speaks to you, and sometimes it's the smallest or simplest ideas that have the biggest impact. Our next episode was titled Charitable Giving Strategies, and this was a fun one to record because so many of our clients are generous with resources and give back to charities and the community around them. We started out by covering 5 great reasons to give to charity. One in particular that stood out to me, probably because I hadn't really thought about this benefit before, but it's the impact that it can have on children and others around you. Giving tends to make everyone more generous, and it helps reinforce an appreciation for what we have. Next, for our more analytical crowd, we talked through 8 tax-smart strategies to increase your giving power. All 8 of these were great tax tips, but one that stood out to me was to use a charitable deduction to offset the tax liability of converting your IRA to a Roth IRA. I think this is such a powerful concept because not only are you being generous and helping a charity with their mission, but you are also strengthening your own retirement plan by converting a taxable asset to a tax-free asset. And last, we finished up with an 8-question quiz designed to help you find out what type of philanthropist you are. When I did this quiz myself, the result I received is that I would be referred to as a beneficiary-centric giver. Not only do the quiz results give you a short overview of what it means to be the type of giver that you were assigned, but it also gives you a handful of recommendations to make the most of your specific giving personality. I thought that was pretty cool because it gives you something you can act on already in itself. If you haven't had a chance to take this quiz, I encourage you to find that link in the show notes and find out your personalized results. After charitable giving, we moved into August with a review of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Honestly, this was a tough one, as I think it's important to stay on top of new legislation and understand how it affects your retirement planning, particularly for me as an advisor, but it's also frustrating to see our government recklessly spend our country further into debt and directly trigger an inflationary period that hits everyday retirees so hard. As we are fresh into 2023 now, we just had another bill called the Secure Act 2.0 pass. So I may do an episode just to give a quick overview of that one, as there are a few changes that directly impact retirees. More than anything, though, the $1.7 trillion in this bill was passed with minimal debate and almost no scrutiny, and it almost guarantees that inflation will continue to be an issue. With the government headed so badly in the wrong direction, reviewing their spending sprees becomes harder and harder, so I will likely keep those episodes brief and to the point. Let's move on to a more positive topic, as our next episode, called What is Your Risk Number?, gave all listeners the opportunity to take control of their own investment planning by pinpointing 3 numbers. First, your risk tolerance. Second, your risk capacity. And finally, the third number is the risk number of your current portfolio. If this is something you never took advantage of, I will add that link to this episode as well, although our team will likely be a little slower getting your results back. But if you've never had your risk numbers checked, that is definitely a must-do. There are a couple things I love about this process. The first is that it's a very easy process, from the initial questionnaire to the one-page results that are easy to understand. I also love that it uses real-life examples for more accurate results. One way of doing this is by posing portfolio gain or loss questions using the actual values of your own accounts. This makes things much more real than asking about a vague 10 or 20% loss. So for example, if you have a $3 million portfolio, you can see the most likely range of outcomes of different risk numbers in real dollar gains and losses. This will give you an idea if this is something you are comfortable with, or if it causes too much anxiety and perhaps another portfolio would be a better fit. It's important to make it realistic so that you are better prepared for when these scenarios take place in the real world. Naturally, after learning your risk number, we moved into an episode titled, What is Your Investment Personality? I really enjoyed sharing this one with our listeners Because even though I believe that the process that we use for uncovering a person's risk preference is better than others, this is still something every retiree gets asked along the way. Granted, the question is typically more basic in nature, something along the lines of, are you conservative, moderate, or aggressive? But at the end of the day, every advisor asks that question one way or another. However, very few advisors are helping retirees understand their investment personality, which was the topic of this episode. Our investment personality process allows us to build an investment portfolio that not only serves the growth, protection, and income needs that we seek, but to also reflect your beliefs about the world around you. As an example, you may be passionate about the Christian faith, support our military, and have a desire to help make clean drinking water available to everyone. While you can still contribute directly to these causes through charitable gifts, you can also tilt your portfolio to reflect these beliefs. You could also support trends that you see evolving, perhaps with 3D printing, blockchain, and self-driving cars as examples. Or instead, you may have more of a propensity to support animal welfare, social justice, education, or any number of other options. It would be challenging to build an efficient portfolio that accomplishes this on your own, but our investment personality process and the technology behind it does the heavy lifting. You just have to share your beliefs and what you're passionate about. One last piece to the investment personality that I will highlight before moving on is that you also get to share some of your communication preferences. One of the worst things for someone who just likes to hit the main points in a simple, straightforward manner would be if they are asked to read a long report or watch a 20-minute video. As the saying goes, don't tell me how the watch works, just tell me what time it is. The same goes for those who like to hear about their investments annually, compared with someone who likes to have daily access to that information. The end goal of personalizing all of this to you as an individual is simply to make for a better experience, rather than trying to fit everyone into the same box. I will try to zip through recapping some of these last episodes, but hopefully giving a high-level overview of these is helpful to some of you. And actually, going through this process has been pretty helpful for myself. I don't tend to listen to any of my own episodes after I record them, and I'm realizing just how much ground we've actually covered in almost 2 years now. So moving into late September, it was perfect timing for this next episode overviewing our Medicare Readiness Report. This due to the fact that anyone who is of Medicare age knows the annual election period starts each year on October 15th. This is the ideal time to review your Medicare coverage for the upcoming year, and even if your own situation doesn't change much, the plans themselves change each year, so a quick review is important. In this episode, I discussed why Medicare Advantage plans are becoming more popular and how they are so much better than even 5 or so years back. I also talked through how we can get rid of the sales pitch that gets overwhelming with commercials, phone calls, and mailers, and instead view your Medicare options through the same fiduciary lens that is always in your best interest. Our Medicare Readiness Report cuts through all of the noise and gives you a one-page report that makes it easy to take action. We included a link in the show notes for this episode that allows you to put your birth date, prescriptions, and answer some health questions and so on, and that allows our team to get to work on your behalf, and the feedback we received was overwhelmingly positive. It actually ended up being one of our most shared links for the year. So as far as action steps from this episode, it would be to share that link with others who are struggling with Medicare decisions, or to check it out yourself if you are in that boat. Moving into our next episode was a phrase you will never see typed into the Google search bar, as this one was called 7 Ways to Invalidate Your Will. Unfortunately, this happens all too often by accident. I won't spend much time recapping this one, as you really want to have a professional set up and review your legal documents. We really encourage our clients to upload their legal documents into their digital vault, as this allows us to see if they've made any of the 7 discussed mistakes. And it also ensures you have a digital backup if needed. One mistake that stands out from this episode is that many people don't realize that listed beneficiaries will supersede what you have instructed in your will. Another way of saying this is that if you still have your ex-husband listed as your beneficiary, it doesn't matter what your will says if something happens to you. That asset will go to your ex-husband. The same can happen if you have a life insurance policy and list out 3 grandkids as beneficiaries. In the will, you might list out all 10 grandkids since your family has now grown. But if you pass away, 7 grandkids are going to be disinherited from that asset since you didn't get your legal documents aligned. This is such a big deal that we do an annual review of beneficiaries and legal documents for all of our clients as part of our service calendar. Let's move into the home stretch, as our next episode was titled 5 Charitable Giving Ideas. I really enjoyed this one because it gave me a chance to put a spotlight on 5 different charities that clients or colleagues had brought to my attention. The hardest part was to do each one justice because the people who shared these with me have a true passion that is hard to replicate. I think the only way to truly get there would be to dive in and experience each, as these charities not only work with financial gifts, but also give people the opportunity to become personally involved. I included a cheat sheet to help you determine if you can do a qualified charitable distribution from your IRA. But if you really want to learn about these charities, I would suggest starting with the websites for each charity, which are all linked in the show notes of that episode. 6 Lessons I've Learned. This was the title of our next episode, which really embodies the whole idea behind why I started this podcast in the first place. I have a unique opportunity not just to share what I know, but to learn from so many of you, our listeners and clients, and share your experiences and life lessons. I plan to have more of these what I've learned type episodes in the future, but you will have to check out that cheat sheet or listen to the full episode to get a refresher on this one. Actually, I will share one of the 6 lessons quickly, just because I like that story. Lesson number 2 was to wake up early and start your day. An old colleague shared a trick to wake up early, and I don't know if this story was passed down or if he actually did this, but the idea is if you need some extra motivation to get out of bed, get your coffee pot prepared the night before and set the timer for when it starts its brew. Then simply set your alarm for a few minutes earlier. So far, pretty straightforward. The trick is not to put the coffee pot in its place. That way, if you don't get out of bed with your alarm, you're going to have a mess to clean up, as that coffee pot is starting with or without you. This might be a bit extreme, but it's really a matter of putting the right motivation in place that will trigger action and results. Just 2 more episodes to go as we closed out November with 9 considerations for advisors starting an RIA. This was a departure from the rest of our episodes where I took a moment to talk directly to other financial advisors instead of our retired crowd. I thought it would be helpful as I have been getting a lot of questions from other advisors, and I figured perhaps retirees would take something away from it too, as it's a little bit of a behind-the-curtain look into the conversation we have within the industry. And in an indirect way, a lot of these questions that I pose to advisors, retirees should be looking at too when selecting an advisor. After all, it's natural and it's okay to occasionally examine if your current advisory firm is still the best fit for your situation. We often have conversations with retirees who are still using the same firm that they had 20 or 30 years ago during their working years. There is not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's healthy to pause for a minute and ask yourself, are my financial needs different now than they were 20 years ago? If the answer is yes, it may be time for a review of your options to see if there is a better fit. It's a bit like going to an orthopedic doctor who did an excellent job for what was needed during that visit, but then you go back when it's time for heart surgery. I know that's a bit extreme, but another visual that stuck with me is that of a grandparent heading to their granddaughter's wedding and pulling out that suit from the 1970s. Now, some people might be able to pull this off, but styles have certainly changed since then, and perhaps your advisor should change to reflect the season of life you're in as well. I won't go into that episode any further, as once again, you can check out the cheat sheet if you just want to hit the high notes. Our firm is positioned in a really unique space right now, So I'm not trying to create competition for myself, but at the end of the day, iron sharpens iron. And if there are more advisors out there doing a great job, this just means more retirees are getting the financial help they need. I think it also comes from an abundance mindset. This is the same thing that I preach to our clients, and hopefully some of that resonates and replaces the scarcity mindset, which can be an easy trap to fall into. Another way we really seek to embrace that abundance mindset is right there on our website. We know we are not going to be the best fit for all of the retirees out there, so we've listed out 4 other financial firms that we have a lot of respect for as a resource for anyone seeking out financial advice. Let's move into our last episode called 9 RMD Questions to Consider. We finished the year with a strong tax planning episode that has direct, actionable advice. The planning opportunities from this episode relate back to a concept I've talked about for years, and I did a standalone episode about this back in June of 2021, which is the concept of rear view tax planning compared with windshield tax planning. This is an easy visualization to remember, but in short, picture yourself driving down the highway. You have to look in the rear view mirror every once in a while to see where you've been and what's behind you. But if you are only looking in the rear view mirror, well, let's just say that's obviously not the best way to drive. But this is what many retirees do, as CPAs almost exclusively do rear view mirror planning when it comes to taxes. And that's not a knock on CPAs in any way, because that's their job, and it's an important one, especially when it comes time to file your return. But it's incomplete without someone doing what I refer to as windshield tax planning, where we are proactively making decisions and adjustments based on where we want to head. Let me give you one quick example. You might go over the Medicare IRMA amount, which stands for Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, and it affects those who have higher income in retirement. Just like other tax brackets, you pay more with each Medicare IRMA bracket that you hit. But unlike other tax brackets, being just $1 over means you are fully in that next bracket and have to pay the full Medicare penalty. With a rear view mirror approach to taxes, you find out later if you were above or below that threshold, and you may have to pay several $1,000s extra because of it. With a windshield approach to taxes, we can often strategically stay just below the limit, leaving thousands of dollars in your pocket. On the flip side, if we cannot stay below the limit because your income is too high, there is often no reason not to max out that bracket up to the next limit, which means you are less likely to have this Medicare IRMA penalty in future years. To pose you a question, would you rather be just over the limit for 10 straight years, costing you roughly $30,000 in real cash, and that's not even considering any interest, or would you rather fill up the bracket in year 1, since it's all the same anyways, pay the $3,000 penalty once, and keep $27,000 in your pocket? Obviously, the answer is easy, but not many retirees are going about their tax planning this way. Largely because most financial firms are either not suited for offering tax planning advice or they are unable to due to compliance reasons. That is just one example of many, but since this episode is all about taking action, my advice would be to find an advisor who proactively does tax planning and can show you their tax planning process. And I guess if you are counting, there was one final episode in 2022, but this was a rebroadcast of our goals episode to start off the year. I added a little bit of new commentary and changed the name to Promises for 2023. The reason behind this is that to me, a goal is something you strive for, but if you fall short, it doesn't tend to be a big deal. But when you reframe a goal as a promise, maybe to yourself or to someone else, then it becomes something that we must stick to no matter what. If you are willing to set a goal but not call it a promise, that might be a good indication that you are not serious enough about it, or that you need to find more motivation to accomplish it. We've all had goals that fizzle out come March or April, but when's the last time you had a promise fizzle out? To me, there's a difference and there's a power in the language that we use. And there you have it, a full year in review. I've had a blast producing this podcast for you for the first couple of years, so thank you so much for listening, for your support, and I look forward to many more years to come. Be sure to make use of everything that I've linked in the show notes for today, as once again, it really is about taking action that will ultimately lead to improvement. You can also find past episodes at healthywealthywiseretirement.com, and we will connect again in just 2 weeks with a whole new slate of topics for 2023. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, we would love if you took a quick moment to leave an honest review. Of course, we're shooting for 5 stars, but if you have suggestions to improve the show, we would love to hear from you too. Just click on the podcast name, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, and scroll down to ratings and review. Thanks again for your support, as this helps us reach a wider audience and help even more retirees just like you. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Lauren Sherman is a certified financial planner and co-owner of Integrity Wealth Management, an investment advisor serving retirees in search of their own healthy, wealthy, and wise retirement lifestyle.